Alright guys, today I'm going to show you a same day dough recipe that can be used to make grandmas, Detroits, Sicilians, or even pizza if you want. Super easy, might even be quicker than my emergency dough. It's a direct dough, it is idiot proof. Here we go, hope you enjoy. Alright, so this recipe is for this type of pan, which I don't even know the measurements, but it looks like it's about 8 inches by 14, and this is 11 by 17, I know that. So let's see. Yeah, if that's 11, it's about 14. So this recipe is going to be for this pan. But if you're going to use something like a cookie sheet like this, just double every single ingredient in the recipe and you'll get the same outcome. So I'm just going to go ahead and add my oil in. I have 205 grams of water here. I'm adding 6.6 grams of oil. So this is a 300 gram recipe, 300 grams of flour recipe. So it's 2% oil, 2% sugar or diastatic malt powder. I'm using diastatic malt powder, 2% salt, and you're using about 0.3% yeast at 1 gram of active, or 1.5 grams of active dry yeast. So that's actually 0.5%. I'll have the full recipe for you guys. So I got all my dry stuff right here. I'm just going to drop that in. I'm going to give it a little stir, everything. And then I'm going to tear my scale. And I'm going to go for 300 grams of flour. I'm using King Arthur bread flour. So I'm going to take this off the scale and I'm going to start kneading. That on my table. If you're using a stand mixer, you can do speed 1 for about 8 minutes. Will be good for what I'm doing. If you're kneading by hand, you have some options. first you have to get it to where there's no dry flour. That's number one. Or minimal clumps, if you will. And then you can either just knead for a couple minutes, let it rest, and come back to it, which I do pretty often when I'm feeling lazy. But if you don't have the time, you can just knead it for 8 minutes. And it's important you let it rest. I like to do this dough for about 10 minutes. And then I kind of go into building some tension on it, which I'll show you. If you ever have dry flour on your table, the wet sticky part of the dough will soak that up for you. If your dough is too sticky, you can wait a little bit, let it cover it and let it sit for a little bit. And sometimes that helps because I can tell this is a little on the sticky side, but it's not sticky enough to really do slap and folds. See, it just breaks apart, but it's new. So I'm going to do that. I don't have any dry flour. I'm going to come back in 10 minutes and resume the kneading process. Alright, so I waited about 10 minutes. Some gluten formed already. It's not as sticky, it's easier to work with for sure. You see that quick, it's already somewhat of a dough. For anybody that's wondering what I'm doing, this portion I first push out lightly with the palm. It might look like I'm doing it hard, but I'm not. I push out and I roll back. When I do it slow, it's hard to really see. And I roll back just to there. Then I do the next portion, same thing. And I hold a little bit of it down so it actually stretches away from me. Then once I get it all the way to a point like that, I turn it 90 degrees and do the same thing. And I always turn it 90 the same direction so that it gets a nice even gluten network. So I'm going to let that sit for another 10 minutes and come back to it again. Alright, so now is a good time to clean most of your bowl, whatever. You can do that while it's going. But very lightly oil your bowl or put it on a dough tray. Oil the top of the dough a little bit. And you're gonna fold over, fold over, fold over, and try to build some tension on that dough. Just a little last bit of gluten development. You can also roll it like a dough if you want. Make sure that's closed, just pinch that up. Pop that in your bowl and cover. Now it's going to go for anywhere from 2.5 to 3 hours. So, and then just let it sit like this, and then next we're going to shape it onto the pan. So I'll show you that. Alright guys, it's been just about under 3 hours, and first thing I'm going to do, so I want to do it lightly, is brush this whole thing with oil. Notice I just used like a little drop. I use a little bit more. Just put some more here. And then you get those sides. And that should be plenty. So it's lightly oiling. Kind of helps you actually, because you want it to stick but not come off when you're done. So, you see it's a nice poofy dough ball now. It's nice and proof 3 hours later. So I'm going to go ahead and get this guy out. And put a little oil in my hands. Alright. Basically, you're just going to press it out like so. I want to be careful. You drop it in your pan like that. Get the corners closest to you first. Push the outside. And then get the corners that are away from you. Like that. There you go. Want to make sure your dough goes all the way out to the sides. And give it a shot with your corners, stretching like this. And see if they behave right. If not, you might need to wait a couple minutes. Alright. Alright, so that's a little better. My corners are pretty good. So now, another 3 hours. I'll let this rest covered. And I'll show you in about 3 hours. It might take 4, depends on your room temperature. But that's pretty much the window. Alright, so I got my oven preheated to 475 degrees. Here is my proofed Detroit, if you will. You can wet your hands, press down. You can add salt, a little bit of saltwater brine on top if you want to make a real focaccia. You have plenty of options. Before you start proofing, you can add sauce in the center, and that'll slightly push that down and proof up the outsides, making kind of a crust on the outside. And that could be considered, that would be a Sicilian without a par bake, which some places do it that way. You just got to be very light adding your sauce, and you can't use that much. If you want to add more before you bake it, that's fine. But anyway, you can make a Detroit by pushing cheese to the outside and having a layer of cheese on top, cooking it, and when it comes out, having a hot tomato sauce, a couple stripes going across. That would be a Detroit style pizza without par baking. I'm actually just going to cook it off like this because I got a nice pork roast, and I'm going to use it as sandwich bread just the way it is. So, but this could also be a Detroit par bake, for instance. If you want to par bake it, you do it as soon as you see the first signs of browning. Not when it's brown on top, but the first signs of browning. And about 8 minutes is good to par bake, and about 10 minutes is good to be finished. After that, it's only if you want it crispier. So I'm going to set a timer for 8 minutes and come back and check on it. Alright, so it's been 8 minutes, and this is what it should look like at a par bake. See, like the brown spots, those are the first signs of browning I'm talking about. That's the bottom there. It's nice. I usually let it cool like this, and I might cut it into fourths and maybe slit that way once they are cool, and wrap them in plastic wrap and throw them in the freezer. You can throw them straight from the freezer to the toaster from that point. Focaccia is amazing. There's so many uses for it. So many great flavors you can get out of it. But yeah, that's a pretty awesome little same day focaccia. It's very important to let it cool before you do anything else. Yeah, that's pretty much it. You can feel it's still a crust. It's not soft or anything. It's a really nice, easy recipe. So I hope this helped you guys. Yeah, a couple things I want to point out that are, if you're going to make a grandma pie, for instance, you would basically, once you get it on the pan, on that part, you basically just give it a rest to make sure the corners are okay for about 10 minutes, and then you bake it. There's not much waiting to proof or anything like that. Another way to do it is to make a dough that is half the batch of this even for that, and you can let that proof. People have different definitions of Detroit, Sicilians, grandmas. I can say that traditional Detroit is not par baked like this. I think you still can make a Detroit like this. The secret is to, when you let it cool upside down to let it flatten out a little bit more. And like at the restaurant, for instance, I might stack 5 of these on top of each other. But if you put a little weight on it, per se, like this, and let it cool that way, what will happen is it'll flatten out, not completely, but enough to fill out this pan, so when you throw the cheese over it, it doesn't drop down the sides and get underneath. It's just right there. I don't want to do that because I'm not planning on making a Detroit with this. I'm going to do sandwich bread. But there are so many possibilities, and that's a very easy way to do that. For instance, I have a very similar recipe that I use at work where I make 20 of these at a time, or 40 or 10 sometimes, depending on what I'm doing. And this is like the easiest way, and I can do a higher hydration than I would do for the pizza dough, so I can get it a little more airy and nice. But yeah, it's real simple, real easy to do. Let it cool, then best thing to do is wrap it pretty tightly in plastic wrap. And if you're going to use it the next day or something like that really soon, you can just leave it at room temperature. If you plan on using it a while from now, I would freeze it. Refrigeration is not recommended for bread. So yeah, hope you guys enjoyed. I mean, this thing, sturdy.